Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is AJ Kuftic, Principal Technologist here at Expedient. Today, we're going to talk about security and how we can help you cloud safer. Quick housekeeping. If you have any questions, please enter them down about here into the Q&A panel. That helps us keep track of the questions. We have Anthony Jackman, our Principal Technologist Manager, with us today to help answer questions. He's going to be popping in during the presentation to help us talk about how multi-cloud security can be accomplished. If you ask a question, you're entered to win a prize. That prize today is a $100 Amazon gift card. And all of this is being recorded. So if you have to step away or you want to show this to someone else, you'll get a link in your email. It will also be on our website, go.expedient.com/webinar replays, youtube.com/expedient, instagram.com/_expedient, and linkedin.com/expedient. Hi, everybody on LinkedIn Live. Hope you're having a great day. Expedient has evolved over the last 20 years. We started in 2001 with co-locations. Today, we have 12 data centers in 8 cities. 6 years later, we released virtual co-location, which then evolved into our enterprise cloud. In 2015, we released push button DR, which is the fastest DR in the industry. With enterprise cloud in 2018, we gave your VMware workloads a true cloud platform. And last year in 2020, we released cloud native to power your next gen applications. And this year we've released multi-cloud, and our entire multi-cloud vision is part of multi-cloud madness. But I'm sure that as part of a cloud initiative, you've had to go talk to your security team. And your security team, when you said, hey, we got this cloud initiative, we want to go out to the cloud. And they said, no, absolutely not. And you probably wouldn't, well, why? Why does security say no? Well, to be entirely honest, most security people, especially ones who have dealt with nothing but on-prem technologies for their entire career, just have a ton of inexperience. This is new. And so this is not just a specific no, it's a no, and we don't know exactly how to go about changing this from a no to a yes. That inexperience is largely driven by the fact that they haven't had to learn it. They haven't really had a need to. That hands-on experience just hasn't come around yet. This might be it, and this might change things, but in terms of being able to start running workloads in Amazon or Expedient or Azure or AWS or GCP, probably not going to happen tomorrow. So they need to spin up and get their skill set up. This also may lead to them believing that the cloud is an expanded attack surface, which in a way it kind of is, right? Right now, they know all of the things that exist in their data center. They see the servers, the storage, the network. They've built perimeters. They know all the antivirus things that they have. They have all the compliance things in place. They have all of their logging in place for what they do today. And utilizing cloud services starts to expand the attack surface out to things that they may not know how to exactly put their controls around just yet. And so that usually leads to a no. And finally, there are new processes that need to be written, because the way that we do things on-prem today may not be the way that you do things going forward. You may lean into more automated deployment. So this manual check that's currently in the security process has to be changed to an automated one. So that's additional work. And as IT people and security people, we don't have a ton of time, weirdly. So having to create new processes can be a bit of a challenge. So how do we make this easier? How do we help you cloud safer? Because what we think is going to make this more important and more able to be delivered in your platforms is that you need consistent security policies, and not just here's a set of tools and this tool works in one cloud and this tool works in another. You need the consistency across all of them to alleviate the burden. Before we get into the tooling, we kind of need to talk about this from a philosophical standpoint. And that security is about intent. The intent of actions. And this is actually something that when you think about it, and you even take a step back and think about it just in your regular life, you think about how many times you've ever said the phrase out loud, that wasn't supposed to happen, and had that been a good thing? It very rarely is. Usually, that wasn't supposed to happen, something's gone terribly wrong. When we think of intent, when we think of security, we think of known good activities, the things that we expect to happen. This automation system is deploying virtual machines. These applications are supposed to talk to each other. This user is supposed to be able to log in. These users are supposed to be able to access it. Those are known good activities. And by being able to lay out our known good activities, we can then blanket block everything else. This is the ability for you to allow the good activities to happen and not have to think about every possible bad activity that could exist in the world. And Anthony, you kind of had this kind of, pointed out to me as kind of this bigger sort of picture and why that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it makes sense. Think about your house, right? There's a very small number of people you probably actually want in your house. And it's much easier to say these people are allowed in and no one else versus trying to explicitly block every person that could ever attempt to walk in your front door. And that's how we think about security in the cloud from multiple perspectives. So from an access perspective, right? We want one way for everyone to authenticate into every single system and explicitly grant that person access. When you talk about traffic that's entering into one of your environments, so at a high level, into your data center, into your AWS environment, into your Azure environment, you want one way of granting that access, regardless of which location you're talking about. When it comes to communication amongst your servers, you want to explicitly allow the traffic that you know should be occurring versus trying to block anything that could ever be malicious. And then lastly, you only want known good code to execute on your servers. And again, it comes back to the same thing. I don't want to look for a known bad signature of a virus or a piece of malware. I want to say, this is how my system should be operating on a day-to-day basis. And anything that falls outside of that, I want to be alerted of it. And I want to make sure that it's not allowed to execute.
And what this actually does, all of what Anthony just said, what this actually enables is a huge ease of support. Because again, it's easier to say, these are the people allowed in, don't let anyone else in, versus trying to explicitly block everyone. And so by being able to have this intent-based concept, you can start to build your security policies and processes around it. And we kind of bring this back to a set of questions. The first is, what code should be running, right? There's a lot of shoulds in this presentation, and that's because a lot of these things are based on what we expect the good actions to be. So what code should be running? The first thing you can do is build code validation. We want to know that when we're writing code internally, that our libraries that are being used are secure, that we're not leaving holes in our code, that we've done penetration testing on those things. That's done by your developers. But here's the thing, not all of your code is going to be written by your own developers. It might be written by a third party. It might be written by a vendor, right? And that's where process inspection comes from. And this is where our Elastic Endpoint Security Toolset comes in. We can do process inspection to say, this is a known good process, and it is doing the things that I expect this process to do. I don't have SSH listing on port 23. Right? I know this process is working as intended. And so that is a known good behavior, because behavioral security is actually what allows us to figure out when things are happening correctly and when they're not. Because the people who are writing malicious code and malware, they've gotten very, very good at ducking these sorts of detections. They've gotten very, very good at ducking signatures. So how do we get around that? We have to know what our code is supposed to do, what our applications are supposed to do, so that we can prevent bad actions from happening based on their behavior. So now that we know what kind of code should be running, we need to talk about how that code talks to each other, right? When our applications are talking to each other, in our current on-prem environments, a lot of us are still running what I like to call candy bar security, very hard outside, squishy in the middle. So we have this firewall level at the perimeter, right? That's blocking our north-south traffic. That doesn't change in this environment, because we need to know what's coming out of our network as much as we need to know what's coming in, right? We can block all the traffic we'd like to on the way in, but we also need to know that traffic shouldn't be going out from certain systems. Like, my database should not be talking to the internet. Right? By being able to block that access, I'm able to take and prevent data leaks from happening from systems that may have been compromised. An attacker does get past that firewall layer, we can help prevent it on the way out too. And that's part of our multi-cloud firewall platform that you'll hear a lot more about next month. Once we have this outside protected, we need to protect the inside as well. We need micro-segmentation along this way. We need to protect our east-west traffic. And because we can do this at a very granular level, we can protect your instances and your code from talking to things that they're not supposed to talk to, right? We only want our app server to talk to the web server and to the database server, but we don't need the app server to talk to our file servers if it doesn't have to. We can prevent and make sure that our traffic is only talking to where it's supposed to and not talking to the places where it's not. That's where the micro-segmentation can come in and lock all of that down and take that squishy center to a much harder one. This is intent-based networking. This is a concept that has been pushed around in the industry here for a couple of years now. But the idea is to take our intentions and put them into the network, that we're only talking to things that we want things to talk to and not letting it talk to anything else. It again is much easier to lock your front door than to just explicitly allow and deny people as they're coming in. So now that we know how this code is supposed to talk to each other, who should be able to access it? And this is where that identity management comes in. Identity management is actually a really key piece to all of this, because if you've ever tried to work through multi-cloud workloads and you start to set up an AWS account or an Azure account or even an account with Expedient, all of these come back together and you say, hey, how do I make sure that I have my account lifecycle through this? How do I make sure that people are only getting access the way that they're supposed to? How do I make sure that I'm not creating additional places for accounts to proliferate that I may not know about? This is where a centralized identity management platform can come in and provide you with single sign-on. Users can use our one login platform to be able to connect to AWS and Azure and our cloud and any other service to provide full multi-factor authentication and full logging and centralize all this access so you know where things are coming from and you know where they're not coming from, which is pretty much anywhere else. This allows you to have simplified authentication, simplified identity management all the way throughout all of your clouds. Again, consistency across all of your clouds. Now that we know, what we intend to do, what the intention of all of our services and code and applications and communications are, how do we know when unintended activity is happening? And this is where our Elastic platform comes in. Our Elastic logging can take and centralize all the logs from AWS, from Azure, from GCP, and pull all of that into a central location that allows us to have things like, I can do things like SIM, I can do things like troubleshooting, I can pull all of these in and make sure that when unintended activities happen, that I know about it. Because things happen. People get spearphished, their passwords get reused, their two-factor authentication can be picked up because they're using SMS instead of an application because they felt like the application was too much work. These are the sorts of things that can happen. So we want to make sure that from a security standpoint that we know everything that's coming in, and we can make sure that, hey, when bad actors are doing things that are not necessarily the way that we expect them to, that we're able to block that. And that's, again, where not just the Elastic logging piece, but also the Elastic endpoint security plays in. We have the behavioral activity inside of the Elastic endpoint to say, hey, someone's using PS exec. AJ's using that. Okay, I know he is a known good admin, PS exec, you're good to go. But if AJ's account at 3 in the morning starts copying PS exec to 50 different servers, probably not something it's supposed to be doing. That's probably bad activity. We're going to block that from happening. AJ's account may have been compromised because he's probably asleep because it's 3 in the morning. And now I know that, hey, something bad has happened. My account's compromised. Maybe an API key is compromised. It's utilizing my account. I need to shut that down and I can prevent an attacker from going any further. Again, behavioral activity. PS exec is a completely fine piece of code. My account is a completely normal application. But when those two things are doing things they're not supposed to, that's when we need to step in and do things about it. Because we want to help you cloud safer overall. And Anthony, we've put together a number of services here between our firewall, microsegmentation, identity, SIM, and endpoint security to enable all of these services to work together across clouds, not just big hyperscale clouds, but our clouds and on-prem as well, because we want to have that consistency across the board. And I think that's actually the really important piece here.
It is, security is notoriously difficult. And, I think our opinion on why it's difficult is because there's too much noise. There's too much noise in the number of ways you can solve a problem. There's too much noise in that products from different vendors have many areas of overlap. And, often you buy two solutions thinking they do two disparate things, and you find out in the middle they overlap. That's noise. That's difficult to manage. When you talk about from an observability standpoint, what we're doing in Elastic, we're hiding all the noise. There are tons of events that happen in your environments all day long that you just don't care about. They're known good. And if you put too many alerts in front of your administrators, it creates noise that doesn't allow them to see the things happening that are not supposed to be happening. So by creating a curated product stack that is all very intent based and feeding an intelligent monitoring system that is good at hiding things that are good and bubbling up things that are bad, it really allows you to have a lot more control over your environment.
And I think that curated stack is actually the interesting part here. Again, these are tools that you could probably have in your data center today, but it's a pain in the butt to manage all of them, right? I've got firewalls, I've got microsegmentation, I've got identity access. In fact, one of the questions here is about how patching works. This involves a lot of work just to build this stack in the first place, let alone configure all of it and use it. And so I actually have a quick poll here that I kind of want to throw out there. Who handles security for your organization and for your workloads? Is it an infrastructure team? Is it the developer team? Is it dedicated security teams? Is it a third party? We want to know so that we can actually figure out, does this stack actually line up with what you're doing? Oh, my favorite. This might be my favorite poll ever. Who's handling workloads? Right now, it's mostly the infrastructure team. There's a dedicated security team, third party sometimes handles it, but man, one developer team is handling security. For a while there was no developers doing security, which I think was pretty interesting there. And this is actually a really great poll because this kind of points out that not everybody handles security the same way, but having the same stack across the board can actually make that a lot easier, right? We all know these tools, things like identity access management with one login, endpoint security with Elastic Endpoint Security. These are things that you could use today to get your platforms up and consistent across the board, whether that's on-prem or in a cloud. And as our firewall, microsegmentation, and SIEM come to market, these are going to be things that extend your security practices even further. So with that, go ahead, Anthony.
I was going to say, I think something important to call out too that's kind of relevant to that poll is what we're looking to enable is allow security teams to have the control that they need, but allowing infrastructure and development teams not to be slowed down by security. And the way to do that is to have security teams provision policies that are consumable by infrastructure and development teams so that they can effectively control their own security by deploying an application through an automation pipeline with a security policy that's been designed by the security team. They are now deploying secure infrastructure on their own, and everyone across the house is happy. The developers and infrastructure team is happy, and the security team is happy as well.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of gets to the first question there. How do we get security teams over the hurdle? I think part of it is, one, having they need time to actually skill up and understand what they should be doing in a multi-cloud world. But at the same time, this tool set and being able for them to create the policies that infrastructure and the developers consume can accelerate that and make it go faster. Again, security, by and large, they need to set up the guardrails, right? They want you to go as fast as you'd like, straight up the middle, but to protect you that if you go and make a hard right turn, that you're not going to launch yourself off a cliff, right? They set up the guardrails and you can operate inside of those all day long. Again, what this tool set is built to do. What about default or accidental non-code exposure? Thinking of S3 buckets that get exposed, it's not a coding issue, it's a configuration issue. So Anthony, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the ways that, we're looking at doing that? Because I know that you and I have talked about this.
Sure. I actually love that somebody asked that question because, inherently you hear about cloud breaches all the time, and it seems like 9 out of 10 times it's somebody left an S3 bucket open.
Yep.
So it's a very simple thing that leads to a very, very large problem. This is something that our SIM platform will actually be able to help you with. There are modules for the SIM that can do things like connect to your AWS account and check through policies that things are configured according to best practices. One of which specifically is, hey, this S3 bucket is open to the internet. Is that intentional or not?
Right, because there's times where you want an S3 bucket to sit open on the internet. There are value propositions to an S3 bucket being open. Things like this is our content store for our website. This is the place where we have all of our press releases. There are public-facing reasons to have an S3 bucket open. There's a number of various vendors that we use here, and I'm sure that you guys are using in your data centers, that use S3 buckets as a distribution point for their code upgrades. So these are the sorts of things that there are valid use cases for it, but knowing that the use cases that you have for them are the only ones that are open, and being able to lock everything else down is the most important part of all. And I think this is the sort of thing that helps prevent those sorts of things and these problems from being a whoops, forgot to check a checkbox to, hey, this is now a known good configuration and I'm monitoring against that configuration changing, because we can set a good configuration day one. It's when someone goofs, they troubleshoot something, they leave the bucket open because someone said they couldn't access it. Then they leave the bucket open to the internet because they said, oh, whoops, forgot to close that up. And now there's a data breach. So how often do we update or patch our firewalls as more and more attacks are relying on unpatched devices to get in? We patch consistently. We have an entire operations team that is dedicated to doing that. That is their jobs. And we make sure that our stuff is patched on schedule and as quickly as we can. Sometimes we have to work around customer schedules to get those patches in. But when critical vulnerabilities come out, we try our best to get on top of those as quickly as we can and get those patched up for our customer base. Ooh. If our organization does not have the expertise for microsegmentation, are the resources available at Expedient to assist with this setup? So we would build the microsegmentation platform. So you don't have to worry about, oh, how do I deploy this? How do I build this? How do I configure it from the start? We can help you with that up front to get you to the point where all you're doing is configuring what should be talking to what. What are your east-west rules that you need to put into place? And that's the beauty of these platforms being delivered as a service. We want to make sure that there is we want to make sure that you have a good platform to stand on. And this is the basis of pretty much every product that we have. We want to get you started to the point where you're actually making a difference for your business and not spending all of your time banging your head reading manuals, trying to figure out, okay, well, how does this get deployed? How do I deploy this in a highly available fashion? How do I have these resources? Where do I get those resources from? We've taken care of all of that so you can actually focus on the things that matter, which is the rules and protecting your workloads.
Specifically to the microsegmentation use case as well, something we're enabling is visibility. So it's not just about blocking, it's also about getting a view into how your environment is working today and using that view to help you craft the appropriate policies. So it's a much easier lift than saying, go interview all of your app teams and specifically have them tell you what firewall rules to write. It's let's look at how the environment is actually operating today. We believe that to be good, and let's start locking it down.
Right. We know that this web server should be talking on port 443, probably shouldn't be talking on port 80, definitely shouldn't be talking on port 1013, right? So how do we lock all of those down and make sure that all the ports that shouldn't be open are closed and all the ports that should be open remain open? Do you feel there's any concern with a one password to rule them all approach with single sign-on, especially with users who don't create secure passwords or are reusing them? I think the answer to that is no. And a lot of that comes back to, with a single sign-on, it's very much like using an Active Directory in your own environment, right? This is the one password that you use. Everything trusts the Active Directory as an authentication source. And if you authenticate correctly against Active Directory, you can utilize this workload. So it's not terribly different in that method. Multi-factor authentication, constantly rotating tokens, is actually a way to go about doing that. And there's also ways inside of OneLogin where you can set passwords in your environment to actually, you do that against, it references Azure AD or Active Directory. So being able to use that and set a password policy that's strong enough from the start can take you a much longer way. But then by having that one password, you don't have to have users remembering 15 different passwords in a bunch of different places. It allows you to actually have a more secure environment because your users are utilizing strong passwords and multi-factor authentication without any of the additional headaches of managing a bunch of different accounts in different places. Do we have any resources to help developers take security seriously? I think the question is, are they willing to put their code on the line when a breach happens? Is their job willing to be on the line when a breach happens? Because it's going to happen. And taking security seriously is kind of the important part of that. So I think when it comes to helping developers take security seriously, it generally takes one good attack, one good instance to kind of spook everybody to say, okay, we need to go do this. We actually need to take this seriously. I think kind of showing them the news of like, you can't just leave things open, because here's what happens when an S3 bucket gets breached. It goes all over the news. Being able to show those sorts of things to a developer and say, look, we know that you're not going to maybe pay attention to this, but you should. And then what we do from an infrastructure side, if you're referring to being on the infrastructure side, talking to developers, going back to them and saying, okay, this is what we are going to do around your applications to protect you because you clearly don't think that security is important, right? So this is where the SIM comes in. This is where endpoint security comes in. This is where the firewalls come in. If developers don't want to take security seriously, then you have to kind of wrap them in a blanket of security to make it safe for them. Anthony, did I miss anything there?
Here's how I would approach it. You have to think about, what a particular type of employee cares about. What do developers care about? They care about releasing code as often as possible to achieve their goal, right? So what you as a security or an infrastructure team have to do is show them how they can deploy their code in a secure manner without impacting their productivity. That's the key, right? So by putting these systems in place ahead of time and wrapping an automation pipeline around them, you can allow your developers to deploy code at the same rate while still being secure. And by doing that, they no longer have a reason to object.
One simple question, one deeper question here. How are the logs traveling from multi-cloud endpoints, AWS, Azure, Google on-prem to our Elastic logs? Is it traveling over the internet? Is it encrypted? It is all encrypted. So it is all HTTPS for port 443. So all of that traffic is encrypted. We're accessing the same endpoints that AWS or Azure would do if you were running logging on-prem. So we're hitting their APIs and pulling those in using credentials through your account that you would help us set up because it's your accounts. But those Elastic logs are all encrypted. It's all secured all the way through. How can we convince upper management that we need to work on a common security framework and try to automate the security coding? Can you recommend a security framework and how to implement it? So I guess the question is, how often do they like doing quadruple work? Because if you have a bunch of different pieces of your organization all doing different frameworks, it ends up being a mess, right? So if you wanted to pick a security framework, there's a couple strict ones. There's the DISA STIGs from the Department of Defense. I happen to like those ones because they have a very specific black and white, this setting must be configured this way sort of world. And then you can write exceptions to say this setting actually needs to be open. But as you're building these sorts of things out, you need to consider your vertical. You need to consider your market, right? So if you're in healthcare, you should be considering HIPAA, the HIPAA and high trust frameworks, because they are built for that industry. If you are in the retail business dealing with PCI or tracking any sort of payments, you need to do a PCI DSS. And a lot of those have a number of security pieces inside of them that are security best practices, really. to actually make sure that you're compliant with an overall industry standard. Your upper management can then tout that you are compliant to these frameworks. You can tout that to customers. Customers feel more comfortable utilizing your applications. Implementing security frameworks can be a pain. Our tool set can take you a good long way there, but it will also come back to your workloads and your applications and the way that you do business on how you actually fully implement that end to end. Anthony, I have one quick announcement to make though. That Michael Slomsky, congratulations, you are the winner of the gift card. Karen will be reaching out to you, so congratulations, Michael. Anthony, do you have anything to add before we wrap it up for today?
No, I honestly, this was a good session. I think we covered a lot. I think the overall message that everyone probably got is, simplify your security stack. Quite honestly, make sure that you cover all of your requirements, but simplifying things as much as possible makes it much more likely that you will stick to the policy.
Exactly. So what's next? Went the wrong way in the slides there. Sorry about that. You can go to our website, expedient.com/services/assessments, where we can sit down with you and help you work out how to actually make this multi-cloud dream a reality. And go to expedient.com/multi-services/services/multi-cloud. You can click on the services link up at the top of the page and click multi-cloud too, to actually see all of our multi-cloud services and see our full multi-cloud, cloud different vision. And finally, we have 2 more sessions this month. I'm scrolling in the wrong direction. Let's try this one more time. We have a session next week, Cloud Simplified. We're going to talk about how to standardize your multi-cloud infrastructure and how to make your deployments simpler. And finally, join us at the end of the month for our Cloud Different, Realizing the Power of the Multi-Cloud Vision with Bob Evans from Cloud Wars and Gene Torres from Zerto. That is on March 31st. And we would love to see you there. Again, the drive for 5, join all 5 webinars, get exclusive Cloud Different merch. We'll see you next week. Thanks.